Hello, my name is Ariana Johnson, and my presentation will be about Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, the wonderful writer, poet, and activist. So here's a little bit about her, a little bio. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper was a poet, fiction writer, journalist, and activist for both women's rights and the abolition of slavery. She was born on September 24th, 1825, to free African American parents in Baltimore. But she was raised by her aunt and uncle after her mother died when she was the age of 3. She attended the Academy of Negro Youth, which was actually run by her uncle. She attended until she was about the age of 13. Then she began working in the house of a Quaker, and that's where she found a library of books and began her love of literature. After teaching for about 2 years in Ohio and Pennsylvania, she began a profession as a traveling speaker for the abolitionist circuit. During this time, she helped slaves escape through the Underground Railroad, and she wrote anti slavery newspapers. She actually earned the title of the mother of African American journalism. And I think that's pretty cool. She's one of the first published writers that is an African American woman in American history, in the United States history. In 1860, she married Fenton Harper, giving her the last name Harper. When he brought 3 children along to her marriage, and they had one daughter of their own. When he died in 1864, she supported the family through her speeches when she continued to speak. During Reconstruction, she was an advocate for civil rights, women's rights, and educational opportunities for all. Up until her death, she was the superintendent of the colored section of Philadelphia and Pennsylvania Women's Christian Temperance Union. That's a mouthful. She was the co-founder and vice president of the National Association of Colored Women and a member of the American Women's Suffrage Association. Harper, she also was the director of American Association for Colored Youth. So education and rights for all were a big part of her livelihood and her belief system, and she upheld that throughout her life. And I feel like that's exactly why I chose her, because she was such an advocate for everyone. And we're going to read some of her poems and we're going to analyze them today. All right, the first poem that I chose was called The Bible Defense of Slavery. So here we go. Take a sackcloth of the darkest dye, and shroud the pulpits round. Servants of him that cannot lie, sit mourning on the ground. Let holy horror blanch each cheek, pale every brow that with fears, and rocks and stones, if ye could speak, ye well might melt to tears. Let sorrow breathe in every tone, in every strain ye rise. Insult not God's majestic throne with the mockery of praise. A reverend man, whose light should be the guide of age and youth, brings to the shrine of slavery the sacrifice of truth. For the direst wrong by man imposed, since Sodom's fearful cry, the word of life has been unclosed to give your God the lie. Oh, when ye pray for heathen lands and plead for their dark shores, remember slavery's cruel hands make heathens at your doors. So, one of the things about this poem that I really realized and resonated with was actually the sarcastic tone. The sarcastic tone of this poem guided us through, I guess, America's hypocrisy through religion. And therefore, it gave her a sort of wittiness, tone, and mood to the poem. And the theme, again, is the hypocrisy of people in Christianity that surrounds the subject of people wrongly using Christian religion to justify slavery. The historical relevance to this poem, I put basically that is relevant because it was written in a time period of which slavery had not been abolished. In order to keep the slaves and to manage them, slave masters would force them to believe in their religion, and then once everyone believed, over time they would work in there that because you are worshiping and because you want to be good and go into heaven, that you need to obey your masters, and therefore they were manipulating the minds of their slaves. And this was going on for years. Politically, slavery during this time again was legal, and this poem was relevant politically because this was a direct attack on the systems keeping slaves psychologically bound to slavery. Because if you are a slave master, you want your slaves to work willingly so you won't have to put up a fight of them trying to escape. And religion was one of the greatest uses of that psychological manipulation. Socially, among the slaves, or the enslaved rather, people, Sunday and religion and going to church was a time to gather and a day of rest. And a lot of African Americans to this day use religion as an escape to escape the hardships of life. Basically, that's why you get a lot of, we'll pray about it. We need to pray about it. In other words, you need to meditate on it. This is your outlet from all the hardships on life. So her writing this poem is an attack. It's really revealing the truth. But to people who this is socially embedded in their minds, this may come as an attack, or it may come as a revelation, and something that they've always done is pretty wrong, or not the religion itself is wrong, but rather what they believed or what their masters have told them, and therefore they would feel more manipulated in that matter. The second poem that I'm going to read by her is called The Slave Mother. Heard you that shriek? It rose so wildly in the air, it seemed as if a burdened heart was breaking in despair. Saw you those hands so sadly clasped, the bowed and feeble head, the shuddering of the fragile form, that look of grief and dread? Saw you the sad imploring eye? Its every glance was pain, as if a storm of agony were sweeping through the brain. She is a mother pale with fear. Her boy clings to her side, and in her kirtle vainly tries his trembling form to hide. He is not hers, although she bore him. For him a mother's pains. He is not hers, although her blood is coursing through his veins. He is not hers, for cruel hands may rudely tear apart the only wreath of household love that blinds her breaking heart. His love has been joyous light that o'er her pathway smiled, a fountain gushing ever new amid life's desert wild. His lightest word has been a tone of music round her heart, their lives streamlet blent in one. Oh, Father, must they part? They tear him from her circling arms, her last and fond embrace. Oh, never more may her sad eyes gaze on his mournful face. No marvel, then, this bitter shrieks disturb the listening air. She is a mother, and her heart is breaking in despair. That was a very powerful poem by Harper. This The theme is basically tearing apart families and what impact that has had on the African American community. So I'll start with the social impact of this poem. Tearing apart the families and which has had evidence throughout history, has impacted the African American community and the social family structure throughout the years in a negative way. This poem at the time socially was meant to resonate with the hearts of most likely abolitionists, white abolitionists, to keep helping the cause. Maybe partly so other white people could hear it and also help the cause. If it was towards slaves or anyone else of that nature, that would have been fine, but I don't believe that the slave masters would have cared much for this poem, because they did not see African Americans or the enslaved as people. And for slaves at that time, slaves could not read, they weren't allowed to read, and they know what's going on in their communities at this time. Politically, I would feel as though there wasn't much of a political aspect. You could take that term in the way of she's emotionally appealing to people in higher places, in order to get them to resonate with the hearts of black mothers, to get them to feel sympathy, to change laws. That is a political aspect you could go about. The historical aspects, to be a woman, a black woman at that, you were considered lower than a white woman who also had no rights. And historically, this poem resonated. It was powerful in its imagery, and through its imagery, it invoked the emotions of loss and pain and grieving. And those are the emotions that Harper is trying to pick at and pluck at, to get people to realize that this slavery thing is actually a problem. So the last poem that I'm actually going to analyze is connected to the slave mother. This poem is called The Slave Auction. The sale began. Young girls were there, defenseless in their wretchedness, whose stifled sobs of deep despair revealed their anguish and distress. And mothers stood with streaming eyes and saw their dearest children sold. Unheeded rose their bitter cries, while tyrants bartered them for gold. And woman, with her love and truth, for these insatiable forms may dwell, gazed on the husband of her youth. With anguish none may paint or tell. And men whose sole crime was their hue, the impress of their maker's hand, and frail and shrinking child too, were gathered in that mournful band. Ye who have laid your love to rest and wept above their lifeless clay, know not the anguish of that breast whose love are rudely torn away. Ye may not know how desolate are bosoms rudely forced to part, and how a dull and heavy weight will press the life drops from the heart. So again, that poem by Harper is connected to the slave mother, except for its aspect. It's focusing on the entire family, whereas the slave mother, she was focusing on both the mother and the child, and you got to see both aspects from the child, but mostly from the mother. You get to see the impact on the family as a whole, how the enslaved man was not able to help his family or protect his family, and how the enslaved woman, his wife, couldn't do anything, and she's staring at her counterpart as you can't do anything, and she knows this, but she also has in her mind that you are supposed to protect my children are being sold away. But in all honesty, towards the end, especially that last stanza or the last two stanzas, it connects being torn apart and being sold to grief, to someone dying. But they say she says that it's an even worse type of grief because you know they're dying and you know that you're not going to see any of your family again. And again, Harper does this through imagery, through her descriptive words and in her poetic devices. She creates that image in your mind to invoke emotion, and I feel like that was very popular at the time amongst the newly freed slaves or people who are abolitionists and trying to get people to feel for the slaves. They wanted to create that image in their head to evoke emotion. Again, I know I keep saying this, but it's true. Emotions, especially people who did not believe that the enslaved did not have emotions, and that's why they could do this. This was a particularly important as in the social aspects of things and political aspects. Again, just as I said while reading The Slave Mother, you want people in those high places to feel for the enslaved. So this has been a reading and an analyzation of Frances Ellen Watkins Harper work, and just to acknowledge the amazing woman that she was and all the work that she did to get us to where we need to be today as women and as African Americans. Thank you.